Hi, gang.
Hello.
Hi, Tina. Hi, Dirka. This is not Jeff. This is David. I'm just going to rename here.
Oh.
Hey, Jay.
Hello.
I am the Regional Social Forum. I just need to rename myself here. Just a sec. Give me a sec. So this is not public yet. This is just panelists coming in.
Okay.
Regional Social Forum. Yeah, that's better. And you should be able to see the participants. We have Jay, hello, Terrilee, Tina,
Hi.
and Dirka.
Now I just got to find out how I can change my name because I'm not good at Zoom.
Okay, Jay, if you click on if you open participants, you'll see your name as it logged you on. Do you see your name and a
Yes.
microphone and a camera? There, you've retyped with your pronouns. Very good. Is that good, or do you need to change it?
That is good. That is good.
If somebody's here.
Hey, Helen. Hello, Helen. How are you?
Okay. What should I put? You know what? No, we don't have a profile picture. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, you don't need to worry about those things. I mean, if you want, you're welcome to change there. Tina Stevens is now Canadian CHF, Canadian Housing Foundation, or Cooperative Housing Foundation of Canada. Excellent. And Terrilee is Cornerstone.
Also, Tina, I was just going to say thank you for putting your pronouns in. It was really nice to see someone do that without anyone asking.
Very easy for me to do.
It means a lot. It means a lot.
Thanks, Jake.
No problem.
You should sit here and do it.
Glad you're here with us today as well.
Thank you. It's lovely to get the opportunity to be on this panel, and I'm honored to be on it when there's so many other amazing people on it. When I saw the lineup, I was like, whoa.
I have a speaker.
Well, we always, well, at least I take the perspective where, we're all at an equal stance and no one's above each other. And we're all here from our collective experience, and that experience is second to none.
That's a very, very good point.
Hide here so you can read what you want to do. Yeah. Okay. I'll talk to these people here.
I just have to mute for a second. I'll be right back.
Okay. Hey, Jeff.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hi. Here's Dirka. How you doing?
Good, good.
Okay, you know what? I was going to tell you, Dirka, that I know this came to me, and it says Helen Reardon, but you see, it's Narcise is at my house, and he is the guy who's going to do the land acknowledgement.
All right.
Yeah, from my computer.
Good, good.
Okay, so should I change my name?
You're listed under panelist and not attendee, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'm a panelist. Yeah, I'm
There's no attendees yet.
Helen Reardon. But here on my little thing, it says Helen Reardon. Maybe I should rename it to Narcise.
Sure.
Okay, Narcise.
Or Narcise and Helen.
Are you going to speak?
The guy who's going to talk.
No, it's going to be Narcise.
If it's only Narcise, then just say his name.
Okay.
Narcise, do you want your last name?
And I prefer the pronoun they.
Oh, okay. So Narcise, and I'll say they.
Please, thank
they.
You.
Okay.
I have the link here.
Okay.
So
I'm looking. Sorry, I'm looking at the schedule, please. Jeff?
Because it's here.
Sorry?
Jeff, I'm looking at the schedule. Who has the video from Stringbone?
I just sent it to you and to Dirka, but what do I do with it? Do I?
I'm sorry. Where and what form did you send it? Oh, here's a link to the Stringbone.
A link in the email.
Okay.
Does that work or?
Yeah, let me just open the video. Barry vid.
Sorry, I didn't send it
No,
sooner,
it's okay.
David.
It's okay. It's fine. It says the conversation you requested could not be loaded.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Should I post it in the chat, the video,
You-
or
Yeah, are you,
I have the link here.
okay, I just clicked on the link, the Google Com mail link
Yeah.
that you emailed. It won't open for me, but I mean, try it in
Okay.
the chat. We'll see if it opens there, but
So I
It
see,
didn't open for me either, David.
yeah.
okay, so I'm at the video and
And it's in what form is it in? Is it a YouTube video or a
oh, you know
MP?
what? Why don't I just Google it and give you that link?
What, can you tell me what you're seeing when you see the video?
Well, I opened the link in the email that Barry sent me, and it goes to the video, and it gives me a link, and I can play
Sure, but
it.
it goes to the video where? As a file, like an MP3 or a link to YouTube?
I think it's a link to YouTube, but let me
Okay.
just check here.
Okay.
Where'd it go?
Yeah, because I got one of those about Stringbone, and when you open it, it's got
YouTube.
videos. It's got different videos that guy's done.
It's
Okay,
YouTube.
share the YouTube video and I'll try, I'll try
But
to
it
do
says
that.
mail.google.com.
Okay,
in
but the
the-
mail.google.com don't open for me.
Okay.
The one you sent doesn't open. If you want to put another mail.
Okay, then I'll just go on and look
Can
up.
Can you share the what works where you see the video? Because the mail link didn't open.
That isn't going to work because that's the same one. But let me just try this again to
So
find a different link.
You're seeing it where? On YouTube?
I see it on YouTube, but it doesn't. It's the same one that you see for some reason. It's the same address, and it's not working.
Okay,
But here's the video now on YouTube. Can I send that to you?
Yeah, just put it in the chat.
Yeah, send the YouTube link to us, please.
Put it in the chat right now.
For example, yeah. Do you, Dirka, have everything else you need to start?
Yes, I have Terrilee's presentation. I have the agenda. I have my speaking notes. I think I'm good. I'm seeing Tina, and then it will be Alexandra. Hello, Tina. Hello, Alexandra. Hello, Terrilee. Fourth is Wendy. Hello, Wendy. And fifth is Jay.
Okay, so there's.
Hello, Jay. Good morning good afternoon to all of you.
Sorry, so who's
And
going to share?
Narcise, I'll be doing a quick thing and then I'll call on you to give the land acknowledgement, okay?
What, you'll be doing a quick thing and then call on Narcisse?
Yes, to give
Okay, 'cause he's here. He's just got to move.
all right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Sorry,
who
David.
is sharing Terrilee's presentation?
Well, how are we going to do this? Either are you going to give her sharing or are
We can do whatever you want.
it's on my computer. What do you I don't have much experience with Zoom sharing, so
Okay, I'm making you co-host. Terry, what is your preference?
I'd rather,
Sure.
it's probably easier if I share my own, just because I can
Okay,
control either slide.
Terrilee, I'm going to make you co-host and then you can share at will.
Okay, perfect.
I have a link to it as a backup, but it's always, well, most speakers prefer to share themselves.
Great.
So if that works for you, let's do that.
Great.
So
and I've got the video link now. Where do you go? Yeah. So I am going to open that in a browser and be ready to share at that point in the program. Okay.
So do you have total control, David?
Well, that might be overstating the case a little bit. I wouldn't, it sounds like a jinx, like bad shit's going to happen if I claim total control, but I have some control.
Boy, that sounds pretty powerful. He's got total control.
I can rename silly names if that's what you're looking for, Jeff. Like I could put capitals on Jeff and Hanks if you wanted, but I don't have to.
No, I just, when I log in, I don't know whether I'm a participant or whether I'm.
No, you're here as a panelist because we both logged in through your account, which is being used by the London, and I just renamed myself London Regional Social Forum. So I am a host.
Perfect.
And I think you are a co-host. Dirka is a co-host and Terrilee is a co-host. Anybody else need sharing privileges before we get going? Speak now.
I don't really need anything, David. I can just disappear, really.
Okay, I'm gonna lurk in the background.
I'm all good.
Do we have a graphic to open with? That might be cool. Let me see here. Just a second. The poster logo, right? That would be cool.
Yeah,
to
the
start with.
poster. The poster is good.
Let me just find that. Housing.
Thanks, everybody, for really
Oh.
coming together and your patience.
I will not be live tweeting during this event because I am way too busy.
I was gonna say, don't try to multitask to that extent. We
No.
really want to have somebody else
Oh, good.
on the social media. I am gonna, when I open it, there's gonna be a lag while I try to get it through to the Facebook page.
Okay.
Okay. So
I
bear
just
with me.
want to say to Jeff, thanks so much because I know you worked last night and you're working tonight. You're just really Mr. Busy Guy, and you're really helpful here.
And thanks to Dirka for emailing the agenda to the panelists because I didn't look after that.
That's okay. I remember I told you it's a team effort.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Dirka.
Okay. Are we ready to rock and roll here? If I hit start, the attendees will
come
show
over
up.
here. They're gonna
So
come.
whatever you say or show at that point is visible to our public. We had, when I last checked, we had almost 100 registrants, which should mean half that, so 50-ish participants, or typically means about that much. I'm going to hit start the webinar and share a screen with the, let me see here, with the poster.
Oh, sorry, I feel like wobbly
Okay, and
wobbly.
then I'm going to make the,
Oh, thank
oh,
you.
that's not
Yeah,
freaking
just
poster,
put it
David.
beside mine. and then we'll put mine right there. We're just gonna sit back here and just relax.
Jeff's phone number. We don't want Jeff's phone number. What happened to the housing poster?
No worries.
I had it up, honestly. Sorry about this, folks. There we go. That's where we are. That's not the housing poster. Housing for all. There we go. Good. Does everybody see the housing poster? Somebody say yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Starting the webinar is now live. So we gotta have some participants. Okay. And I am going to try to get the stream going. Bear with me, folks. Dirka, would you like to welcome people while I get this going? Hello, folks, and welcome. We are starting a webinar shortly, and they have, of course, changed the interface for Zoom to Facebook Live. So I expected it to go to the London Regional Social Forum, but it looks like it's going to go to my personal Facebook, and I'll share it from there to the London Regional Social Forum. Welcome, everyone. You want to take over, Dirka?
Yes, can I start my video?
Yes, please do.
Okay. I'm just gonna shift some things over. All right. Well, good afternoon, distinguished panelists, friends, and neighbors. We welcome you to the first of our 2 virtual discussions on housing for all. Special greetings to those in the audience joining us from outside of the London, Ontario region. My name is Dirka Prout. My pronouns are she, her. I am a social forum activist, Evidence for Democracy Science Pledge ambassador, the Spelling Bee of Canada London chapter president, and vice chair of the Unity Project for the Relief of Homelessness. And I'll also be your moderator today. I would now like to invite Narcise, and they are going to provide a land acknowledgement.
Do you want a minute? Oh, it's unmuted now. Hello,
Just say, can you hear me?
can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed, Narcise. We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dirka. So my name is Narcise, and I prefer the pronouns they. So I'd like to begin by saying that this work takes place on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron people, and lands connected with the London Township and the Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. We acknowledge the injustices of the past and present and are committed to act in solidarity with Indigenous people with humility, respect, and reciprocity. We're committed to working in peace and healing with with the surrounding First Nation communities of the City of London, Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida of the Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. I would like to quote Robin Wall Kimmerer, that the earth calls us to reciprocity, and highly recommend checking out, there's an article, that she wrote with Emergence Magazine, Skywoman Falling, and oh, I do apologize, and the Service Berry, An Economy of Abundance, which I can share in the thread. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Narcise. Before I get into today's, I'm going to just start my video again. Sorry. All right. Got too many screens going on. Please forgive me. So before I get into today's formalities, I would like to announce that on Thursday, April the 29th at noon, Old East Village Cares, which is located at 707 Dundas Street at the St. Joseph Hospitality, will be serving a hot meal and snacks. We will drop this info in the chat and we'll repeat it at the end. The London Regional Social Forum is a non-partisan group of London and area activists who seek to disrupt the status quo. We not only imagine a better society, but work tirelessly to bring it into fruition. I am seeing a note that they cannot hear me. Is that still the case?
I can hear you.
Okay, all
I
right.
hear you fine, Dirka.
All right, the panelists are saying that they can hear me. I'll continue. Our participants can include individual social justice activists, as well as those from non-governmental social movements and other non-partisan organizations. As noted on our website, londonregionalforum.wildapricot.org, Activists resist the neoliberal corporate agenda in favor of a more just and equitable systems for youth, workers, persons living in poverty, the differently abled, women, Indigenous peoples, and others. The right to housing is being ignored in London. We are tired of seeing and hearing stories of overflowing shelters, pregnant women living on streets, rent evictions, slum landlords, sky-high rents, and even higher house prices, and people sleeping rough, not only in the downtown, but also in suburbs all across London. Action on the London housing crisis is needed now. So as a result of all this, we have conceived this pair of virtual discussions to spur action on implementing solutions to the housing and homelessness crisis at this very time, at this very critical time. As one of our activists remarked during our last planning meeting, we have now seen how governments have shown themselves quite adept to finding money for things they deem important. So our primary goal is to find ways to press governments to find permanent solutions for the housing crisis. And since we are a small group, we wish to support the work of existing London area housing organizations and invite them to be active participants of the social forum. So to guide us on how we achieve our goals, we have assembled a diverse panel of 5 activists who span various housing areas, including cooperatives, foster care, women's shelters, and youth shelters. You can now hear authentic voices from the Indigenous, Black, rural, urban, student, female, and non-binary communities. Each speaker will have up to 15 minutes to present their perspectives. After each speaker concludes, there will be a moderated 5-minute question and answer period for questions directly only to that speaker. It will be easiest for us if you drop your questions into the Q&A box and not the general chat. Persons can also raise their hand and ask to be unmuted, and you can even share your video if you feel comfortable and ask a question in that manner. After the 3rd speaker, we will have a musical interlude from Stringbone, a message from the London Homeless Coalition, followed by the final 2 speakers. If there is sufficient time, I will also host a moderated Q&A session with questions directed to all panelists. When we have about 10 minutes or so left in the agenda, I will conduct a call to action, wrap up with all the panelists, followed by an announcement by Anthony Verkamos for events by London ACON. So thank you very much for attending today. And I would like to now introduce our first speaker. So this is someone who is Tina Stevens. She is a woman who needs a little introduction in the labor circles and Indigenous circles. She is the president of Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, and she is also their Indigenous Circle Director, the recording secretary of London and District Labour Council, a co-op activist, Indigenous leader, determined and patient teacher. And I can attest to this because I have been a recipient, so fortunate to get one of these. She has a hug that can heal a heart. So for the past couple of years, Tina has served as the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada's president. And in that position, she has provided a lot of, that position actually provided her with a lot of opportunities and challenges in dealing with Indigenous issues, including poor housing conditions. And she strongly believes that that CHF Canada can be a leader to provide solutions in affordable housing, because over 50 years, they have demonstrated their commitment by being one of the largest diverse housing communities across the country. She also says that the strong connections within our cities and municipalities has fostered a strong path to share the successes and concerns of our housing members and has garnered the attention of all levels of government, as demonstrated in the last throne speech and local COVID-19 recovery network groups in many municipalities. So I warmly welcome our first speaker, Tina Stevens, and I turn the floor over to her. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start off. I cannot turn on my video, so just to let the organizers know.
Would you like us to display a graphic, Tina, while you speak?
No, if you just want to turn on my video so I can.
Oh, sorry, you don't have permission to turn on your video.
I do not.
I'm sorry. That's weird. I don't have a. Here, I'm making you co-host because I can't see a control for video on you. There
All
you
right.
are.
Now I can
Welcome.
see Jeff too, so that's good. So welcome on Ani and bonjour to everyone. Mimins Indigenous cause Kitigan Zibi Nadunjaba and Mong Nadoram. And so my given name that was passed on to me is Mimins Little Pigeon. My home territory is Kitigan Zibi, which is the Algonquin Nation, which is about 2 hours north of Ottawa. And my clan is the Loon clan. And that's really important because of the fact that the Loon clan provides a lot of communication and a bridge in regards to being able to communicate from leadership to other groups, and then providing the communications back from the group to the leadership on important issues. And as many, as Dirka had listed in regards to many of the roles that I do play, absolutely demonstrate that I am in a position in many to be able to send out those important communications and receive direction, and to be able to look at important issues such as this, specifically on this day for Housing for All. And so just to give you a little bit of insight into CHF Canada is that we represent about approximately 92,000 units of housing all across Canada. And in totality, we have about just over 2,200 housing co-ops ranging from British Columbia all the way to the Atlantic provinces. And for the most part, housing co-ops cost less to operate, about 14% less than municipal or private nonprofit housing, according to a study that was done by CMHC. About a third of all of our co-op households pay a monthly charge geared to their income. So specifically in regards to, based on, we have limitations in terms of our amount of subsidy from CMHC, and that is passed on to the members of the housing cooperative as a whole to be able to provide affordable housing co-op. And so in regards to from CMHC, 58% of our co-op members are women. 50% of the co-op housing households are female single person or female single parent households. 11% are members of visible minorities. 20% are immigrants. 10% are of Aboriginal ancestry, and those are housed in 5 housing Indigenous specific housing cooperatives all across Canada. And 12% of households include a person with a long-term physical disability. And so when I'm looking at in regards to the provisions and the services that CHF Canada is able to provide for Indigenous communities, as well as the households all across Canada, you know, I have to, and I cannot be remiss in regards to looking at specifically the percentages in regards to that we experience here in London for experienced chronic homelessness. And as well in regards to, because of the fact that that's existed for either 6 months or more. And in most cases, in some fashion, that has lasted up to a period of 7 years. And that's just shameful for the London and surrounding area to be able to have homelessness exist for that long for a single person. And so when we look at the percentages in regards to, 25% being between 40 to 49, 24% between 30 to 39, and 6% specifically for 60 years old and over, we're not taking care of those people that bring us into life in terms of our elders and our parents and our grandparents. 3% as well, we're looking at our children, 19 years or younger, 63% being as male, 32% being as female, 2% being identified as gender expansive, meaning either gender queer, gender non-conforming, and other gender identity. 29% identified as Indigenous or having Indigenous ancestry. And above all, in regards to a very large amount of percentage, 59% identified having mental health issues. These specific percentages were put out in 2018. That was 3 years ago. So I'm quite sure, and I'm quite certain that many of those percentages have risen over the last 3 years, and specifically during the last year due to COVID. It's really shameful that the City of London is not necessarily being conducive to being able to provide or to be able to create the prioritized partnerships that are needed to be able to house more people that require it in the City of London, specifically those people that are experiencing homelessness. People experiencing chronic homelessness, we know, use the emergency shelter system, the EMS, the justice system, and the healthcare system. We know that chronically homeless people have the added challenges of declining physical and mental health with higher rates of trauma, addiction, and injury, specifically because they do not have a place of residence that they can call home. And specifically as well, some housing listings are blatantly geared against low-income individuals, going as far as to exclude anyone on Ontario Works, people that may have drug, substance, or are users, and people receiving Ontario Disability Support Programming fundage. And because of those shortages and complications, absolutely in the City of London, the emergency shelters are seeing longer stays on average of 46 nights and going beyond. And this too can create barriers for those who need them. Chronic homelessness will continue in London, but there are people on the front lines who are trying hard to make sure it will come to an end. So for CMHC and specifically the Indigenous housing co-ops in London, we have been actually addressing the issue for more than 7 years and being able to create solutions, positive solutions to the issue of homelessness. And there has been no actions taken to be able to have the ability to expand and to create more affordable housing units in the City of London. Now, we have seen an influx in regards to, and there was a success over the last year from ATLOSA, one of our sister organizations in the City of London, in being able to obtain some units and to be able to as well provide services that would be attached to that housing, and to be able to provide those services just similarly to like the Unity Project and My Sister's Place and so on. And so when we're looking at our individuals, we know that within 2020, there were over 1,000 people that were experiencing homelessness in the City of London. And we know with respect to, there's a high percentage who have accessed emergency shelter. We know that there's a number of individuals accessing emergency shelters 10 times higher than any other groups. As well, in regards to, there are a large percentage, specifically 59% of people that are staying in emergency/domestic violence shelter, because there has been an increase on the impacts on the women, and specifically Indigenous women in the City of London. We know that the percentage is increasing for people that are trying to stay at someone else's place, either that's a friend or a family, and as well in regards to that over 62%, again, going back to my initial number of up to 7 years, that at least 62% are experiencing chronic homelessness and continue to do so. And we know that the homelessness amongst Indigenous peoples can be traced back to historical trauma, the oppression, the racism and discrimination that have been received. We know that homelessness amongst Indigenous people should be considered as a consequence resulting from Canada's history of colonization and exploitation of Indigenous land and populations. We know that there is significant abuse, and we know and acknowledge that cultural trauma occurred through the use of the residential schools to house and educate Indigenous children, and furthermore, the 60s scoop, which took Indigenous children and placed them in white foster homes. Many of the personal issues, including familial dysfunction, substance abuse, addictions, health issues, and community violence, are faced by Indigenous peoples. And that acts as contributors to homelessness that can be directly linked to various types of historical trauma as well. We can look at, in regards to the historic displacement homelessness, where Indigenous populations have been removed or displaced from their pre-colonial lands and waterways. We know that contemporary geographic separation homelessness, where Indigenous populations have been separated from their current tribal community and national lands and waterways. And that's as a result of poverty and as well as the lack of employment in their communities. And we know that they are trying to struggle to be able to keep their families together, to be able to keep their children housed, and to be able to have those teachings and those cultural teachings and traditions that exist within their home communities. But there are a lot of people, and has increased from on reserve to off reserve, going to the urban settings. We know there's a spiritual disconnection in homelessness, where Indigenous peoples have been separated from their Indigenous culture. We know that there's been mental disruption in imbalance homelessness, where there's a loss of health, mental functioning due to discrimination, the exclusion, the forced assimilation, as well as the marginalization experienced by Indigenous peoples due to the history of colonization. We have seen the disintegration of our culture and the losses of our culture. People have lost their knowledge, their identities, their names, their languages, their gender roles, their songs, their traditions, their rites of passage within all societies. And of course, in regards to, because there's a lack of affordable housing, overcrowding as well creates potentially unsafe and unhealthy environments and increasing risks for eviction and stress. And there are a lot of evictions that are unnecessary for Indigenous people. And so in regards to, when we look at being able to know where to go, Indigenous individuals may have a complete lack of access to stable shelter, but also have nowhere to go because of a lack of kin supports, a lack of knowledge about housing support services, lack of funds to secure travel or housing or community banishment, among others. And of course, there is a large percentage in regards to our Indigenous women who are trying to escape or evade harm, in that they are in unsafe housing and they're trying to fight for their survival. So when we look at CHF Canada in regards to for cooperative housing, we look at issues of structural factors, you know, in regards to that, we have issues of lack of adequate income. We have lack of access to affordable housing. We have lack of health supports, and specifically for Indigenous people and other people that are homeless, they experience discrimination. And as well, there are the factors that we all live with, specifically the shifts in the economy, and that is absolutely have shown the inequities and has enlarged the inequities during this COVID time, both nationally and locally, which has created challenges for people to earn an adequate income, pay for food, and specifically for housing. We look at the issue of poverty. Homelessness and poverty are inextricably linked. People who are impoverished are frequently unable to pay for necessities such as housing, food, childcare, healthcare, and education. Cooperative housing creates a positive solution by being able to provide housing to people that are experiencing poverty. And we do try to find specific factors and organizations and things that will help our Indigenous people as well as other people as a whole within the cooperative housing. We know that there's a critical shortage of housing that is affordable, safe, and stable. We know that with respect to the last federal budget, that there has been an influx to the national housing strategy, but it does not complete the solutions that are very dear to us in regards to being able to have the ability to provide housing. It does not create in regards to the sense of being able to have affordable housing created. And the affordable housing that they talk about in the City of London is not necessarily going to be accessed by people that are homeless because of the amount of monies that are going to be required to be able to pay those rents in the affordable housing units that are being built. So we've asked the federal government to be able to, and we have been asking the federal government for at least 7 years and beyond, to be able to create some sort of funding to be able to actually create more affordable housing units. And so we're hoping that the federal government will start to initiate even more abilities as opposed to red tape to acquire new affordable housing units for the City of London to be able to eradicate homelessness going from now and into the future. We have to be able to protect those people that are fleeing from domestic violence, specifically in the areas of youth and our women, and specifically for those who have children. You know, we end up, young people, you know, can be victims of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse, and they often end up experiencing homelessness, as well as for the people that brought us into our lives, the seniors that are experiencing abuse and neglect are increasingly at risk of homelessness, and that's shameful. For us, in regards to the housing cooperative, specifically in the City of London, there is First Nations, there's Native Intertribal, and there's Four Feathers. And they were specifically created to provide affordable housing for Indigenous people. The vast majority of Indigenous people in Ontario live off reserve, as I said, in urban and rural areas. Women and girls in particular are at risk of experiencing homelessness. The consequences of not being able to provide safe, affordable housing in terms of existing stock, as well as being able to ensure a new supply. It's just creating and exasperating a bad housing situation and making it worse. The cooperative housing live in regards to on 7 principles: voluntary and open membership. It just means cooperatives are voluntary organizations open to all persons able to use their services and willing to accept the responsibilities of membership without gender, social, racial, political, or religious demonstration. Cooperatives are controlled by their own members who actively participate in setting their policies and making decisions. We also have members contribute equitably and democratically control the capital of their cooperative. The members make the decisions on where the housing funds need to go first in regards to being able to maintain the housing stock that they currently have. We also are autonomous, and so that when we enter into agreements, that we do so on the terms to ensure democratic control by our members, and we maintain our cooperative autonomy. As well, CHF Canada provides education and training for their members and elected representatives. So they inform the general public and particularly young people and opinion leaders about the nature and benefits of cooperation. So we continually reach out and seek and represent our cooperative members on an annual basis. The cooperatives serve their members most effectively and strengthen the cooperative movement by working together through local, national, regional, and international structures as well through the International Cooperative Alliance. And finally, our concern for the community. Cooperatives work for the sustainable development of their communities through policies approved by their members. When we look at Indigenous principles, specifically our teachings, love and truth, we give back to the community and fulfill its needs and aspirations as they are more important for those of just the individual. Wisdom and humility. Knowledge is shared through generations to ensure continued autonomy. Honesty and responsibility. Everyone in the cooperative movement has an integral role and responsibility in the community. Honesty and wisdom. Community members choose their leaders based on key principles. Equality and respect. Each member of the community is equal and respected. Sustainability. Members are responsible in making decisions in keeping with sustainable resources for the future, specifically our future generations. Social responsibility, equal redistribution of wealth, and reciprocity. Everything is shared. And today, like anywhere else, nowhere else, is our time to say housing for all. This is a key movement and a key moment in regards to for all housing organizations to be able to march and to be able to speak out with loud voices, coming together as one in a unified way to be able to say that housing has to be fixed. The issue of being able to house people to be able to bring solutions to homelessness has to be fixed. And so we have to continue to support one another in homelessness to be able to make improvements. And we as well have to be able to nurture each other and support each other and speak on each other's behalves so that we can have better housing for all, including improvements to the types of housing conditions that are being experienced, and to be able to make improvements so that, as CMHC has said, they want to bring a solution to eliminate homelessness by 2030. We certainly know that a lot more has to be done. We know that housing is important for everybody's health and well-being, and we need to be able to continue that support. We need to continue to make sure that we can bring the people into the housing realm that don't have housing now. And we need to have more solutions to make sure that they can remain solidly in their housing as opposed to being evicted. So there are solutions, but we do have to work together. And I know that CHF Canada has provided that support for individuals for over 50 years, and we will continue to do so. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Tina. Just letting the audience know we have a small change of plans. Um, Alexandra has to leave early. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Alexandra speak right now after I give a brief introduction. And then we'll do the Q&A period for both Tina and Alexandra together. Okay, I'll start by introducing her. Do you prefer to go by Alex or Alexandra?
Alex is fine.
Alex is fine. Okay, because that's what you wrote in your biography. Alex is a performing artist living in London, Ontario, focused on telling stories of Black joy through music and theater. She is a change agent and creator of equitable and diverse workspaces, a founding member of Black London Network and a lead activist for Black Lives Matter London. Alex is an advocate for racial equity and a community champion of local Black culture. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Tina, for that wonderful speech you gave. Lots of facts and lots of statistics that are very important. And it's important to note that, you know, the research has already been done with regards to homelessness and the amount of people sort of displaced, experiencing houselessness, and the amount of work that we have to do within this sphere. As you know, I was thinking about this panel this week. I couldn't help but think that we are living in a society where we're focused. Our leadership is focused on economic health for a few. And that doesn't trickle down through the systems to say people who are homeless, people living in the margins, vulnerable peoples, Black individuals, Indigenous lives. And, you know, it is hard to appeal to government bodies about the problems like houselessness and homelessness if they haven't experienced it themselves. We're asking lawmakers and policymakers to provide policy and changes for something that they haven't experienced, and therefore I don't think can really quite grasp and empathize the intensity or the gravity of the situation. Now we have, you know, people on the ground, as Tina was alluding to. There are people who are working tirelessly and spending, and this is their life's work to make other people's lives better. They come to face with homelessness on a daily basis. They see the effects, they see the causes, and you know, one of the dividing measures between those type of people who are on the ground helping and governmental bodies is that they're in it and they can see and they can understand. I think you know, change happens at the ballot, as we've heard many people say, and I think it's very important that we focus our energies on getting the leadership in there that can focus on us. You know, when we have leadership, like, let's talk a little bit about Doug Ford. And, you know, he comes from wealth. He inherited a business from his father, and he is very wealthy. His understanding of the world and his viewpoint of the world is that of wealth and that of having a lot and having enough. So bringing a concept like homelessness, yes, he understands what it is, but it's that difference between understanding it and treating it as it and being indifferent towards it. My mom shared with me an article about, you know, racism is one thing, like extreme racism, in your face, overt racism, like that is experienced in the States, is very much almost a tangible problem. But when we talk about the racism that's here in Canada, and we talk about how it's like secret and insidious and moving in the dark places, and it's not overt, it's not in your face, but it is there. There's microaggressions, there's biases, there's things, there's a lack of employment opportunities for people of color. The list goes on, and these sort of darker things happen because certain people believe or feel indifferent towards Black people or Indigenous people. And so when we have people who are experiencing homelessness, we have people in power who are treating this situation indifferently. It's not necessarily a problem that's in their face. It's not a problem that is that garners any sort of real attention to, because that's not their reality. And I think it's worse than acknowledging the problem and trying to offer these temporary measures. It's the system itself is not built to fix and permanently eradicate systemic racism and permanently eradicate homelessness and houselessness and all of these other things. Oppression works in so many different ways, and this is just one of the ways that our current leadership, indirectly or even directly, continues to oppress certain groups of people. And so, I am making this appeal to folks who pride themselves in how they vote, and pride themselves in being change makers and really working towards a just society. We need to encourage people to vote for people who are going to make societies better. And I'm guilty of this too. Up until, most recently, I've been voting based on what my parents have always voted for. And then I've always voted for what works best for me. I think we need to focus on what works best for the people who need the most help, and the people who need the most rehabilitation and the most services. And it's evidenced in, I'll take you back to this past weekend where Doug Ford brought in more police powers to police people and encourage the stay-at-home order. And we saw how chaotic it was. And a lot of messages, including from Black Lives Matter, said that, this type of law is really focused on people of color, specifically Black and Indigenous. Like, we are actually now in danger, in obvious, overt danger. And, there was a whole big uproar about it, and the law was changed. And the law was changed, I think, specifically to appeal to the Black and Indigenous folks. The police departments do realize that, they're holding these biases, and they are dangerous, and they are inherently biased. They're not changing it, but they realize it. And so, but that law that changed for Black and Indigenous folks, the lowest common denominators, it changed and made the thing better for everyone in all of the province, not just the Black and Indigenous folks. So I think once we make laws and create things and policies that change and work for the better and focus on houseless people, homeless people, people of color, people living in the margins and disparities and all these types of situations, once we change that, the whole entire society will be morphed into something better. And I think, and this is the last thing I'll say because I do have to go, but I fully believe that we have the power to make these changes happen within our lifetime. And I think that change starts with, we have to focus less on our needs and our wants, and we have to focus less on trying to fix these problems for them, those homeless people or the homeless people. If my best friend is homeless, I'm homeless, and until I fix that, we're not going to flourish. We need to get rid of the divides, and that includes the language, us and them. It's all of us. And that was evidence this weekend. What a small thing can do for the entire society. It's just incredible. So yeah, hopefully I made sense. I will wrap up now. Thank you for having me. I'll open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Alex. I understand from our backend people that Tina also had to leave. So, but do you have time for 5 minutes of questions? All right. Okay, great. I'm just gonna check the Q&A box and see what's there.
Yeah, I'm just combing through the comments as well.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a question from Melanie Frank. I don't know if she had originally intended to put this to Tina as well. Are there other Ontario cities of London size that are good role models? And our back host David has indicated he'd like to answer this question live. Okay, that's disappeared now. And another one would be from Brian Smith. How could a community collaborative of various agencies and nonprofits create cooperative housing in a small town where 40 to 50 people or more are experiencing homelessness, who would show them not only the need, but the way to remedy the need?
Is that for me?
Well, Tina isn't here, but maybe you can add a perspective. And then I have a question that is definitely for you from Sandy.
Okay. Create cooperative housing in a small town with 40 people who experience homelessness. I think it's just a matter of the communications and doing it. I forget the gentleman's name that's in Toronto. He builds those little tiny shelters, and he was profiled in the New York Times, which is phenomenal. He didn't ask anybody, he just went out and did it. I think we get bogged down with the legislation. The legislation isn't working for the people who need it. The legislation, the City of London, for instance, came up with temporary housing. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be emotional, but homelessness is not a temporary problem. It didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's always been. So let's just build permanent housing solutions. I don't understand. I don't understand. This man, he crowdfunded, sourced money. If I'm telling you right now, if a couple of London organizations said, we want to raise money, came to Black Lives Matter, we have a huge platform, says we need to raise money, let's fundraise and get this, let's build an apartment building. It'll happen. You know, maybe that's me living in a utopia, but that's actually how things, you just have to just go and do it. I don't know. I don't have a more technical answer for that question.
Mm-hmm. That's sure. I mean, you know, it seems as if this is not a new problem. It's been a problem that has been existing for quite a few years, and it's getting worse. In my introduction, I talk about the suburbs because I do live there, and you know, over the years, I've seen homeless people moving into the suburbs as well. I also went to a youth YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited fundraiser, where a young woman was the guest speaker, and she spoke about having to move from a rural community to London to get mental health supports, right? But she wound up being homeless. So Speaking specifically to what you have said, Alex, Sandy Iredale has asked, if everyone votes for the party or people most likely to work towards a just society, just maybe the career politicians who want to keep their job will work towards a just society. Do you, I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but you know, do you have anything to add to what Sandy has said?
I do, and I appreciate that feedback. I appreciate that comment. I think it's hard to know who just politicians are. It's really hard to know. I think the people working in homelessness now, the people working in Black Lives Matter, social justice, the people working in there's groups for medical social justice within medical societies and medical organizations. Those are the politicians that we need. We can learn how to do, I can learn how to do, make policies that benefit, but you can see that I'm doing the work on the ground. I'm not running for anything, by the way. Dirka is. You know, you can see that Dirka is on the ground working, actually working to make things better and change. And she is a change maker. That is the type of person that we need in politics. A lot of politicians get there because they have the money to run and they know who they know. And that's how they, like Trump, he had no ability, but he had money and he knew a lot of good people, a lot of the right people, not saying good people, a lot of the right people. So we do have to do our own due diligence and make sure that we're electing community-based leaders. That's how we get those changes. You can see the work that Dirka is doing. You can see the work that I'm doing within Black Lives Matter. And I'm doing this out of just because I need to make a change. And that those type of people are the people who will work for the communities. They will come back and work for the communities. Too many politicians have oh, I get a 6-figure income. Oh, I get to fly here for free. Oh, I get these perks. Oh. And then, you know, the community sort of falls in the background. And there's a lot of performative leadership with regards to, I'm going to black out my social media posts because I stand for Black Lives Matter. I'm going to go to this one ribbon cutting ceremony because that's my contribution to this entire project. Those are the wrong people. I think we need to really investigate proper leaders and convince them and support them to then go and run things. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks for the shout out, Alex.
No
I do remind the audience that this is a non-partisan event.
I know. I couldn't help it though.
But that said, I hope the audience, if I misstep, will keep me, if I am elected, to account. Laurie Gibson says, Alexandra, it was wonderful seeing you present again. She really appreciates everything you had to say, and you did answer a question that she wanted to ask, and she wanted to say thank you. She notes that there's a lot of intersectionality in homelessness, and she wants to know, how do you go about changing people's perspective on us? You know, there's that divide and rule thing that it's so common with, if people know how British people, the British colonized, that's definitely one of the things that they used is divide and rule. So, but there's also a growing political divide, right? People have gone into camps, particularly with the era of Trump. And people don't want to spend money on things that don't affect them because this, as you said, it's not a personal problem. How do we change that narrative and convince people that the vulnerable ought to matter?
If I knew the answer to that question, I don't think I would be running a chapter of Black Lives Matter. You know, I haven't figured it out, to be honest, and I'm putting my hope in, again, you know, electing the right leadership to help make these changes. You know, I know I keep saying, and maybe I shouldn't say it because this is, you know, I don't want to get too political, but, and I won't say it. I just think that there are a certain amount of politicians who firmly believe that white is right and, wealthy is above all. And we're not going to convince them to open their pocketbooks and open their briefcases and hand out money. They're just not going to do it, because somewhere in their own personal life, they've developed a bias towards people living in the margins. And that's just how it is. And so I think the only way forward really is getting people in office who come from the margins. We've had so many politicians who are a certain type of person, pale, male, and stale, as my good friend who runs What's a Wet and Checkpoint online. And having that one type of person always looks out for that same type of person, right? We need Black people who understand and see that Black people are human. We need Indigenous leadership to say, this is how we do things in our own communities, in our own tribes, and bring that to the forefront. That's how we really make a society where Black lives matter, where Indigenous lives matter. We need people of influence, change makers who can actually make those changes, find value in those people, find value in investing in those communities, and make those changes. I have 1 minute left. I'm just letting you know, Dirka. Sure. I can be a little bit late. I'll just tell them, but.
All right. In that, I did say that it was going to be the last question there, but perhaps we can. I'm trying to pull up the chat in the last minute. Jill Bicklin had, and I apologize because I don't have. I'm dealing with a bunch of screens, even though I have 2 laptops going. Can one of the co-hosts please read Jill's comment in the chat, please?
Jill in the chat. Oh, I've missed a lot of messages. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Okay, I've got it up.
I can read it if you want. Apparently, the city of London has partnered with Ellis Dawn building a low-income building in West London. Sounds like a step towards the right, getting things done. Big contractors want to get involved if the city invests. Thank you, Jill.
I think a lot of these projects are based on within, what's in it for me. And my husband works construction, and I'm not knocking, and it's just hypotheticals, My husband works in construction, and he's done city projects. He's done all types of projects. And he's like, when it's the government that's paying, you can charge top dollar. And I'm not putting it past Ellis Dawn that they don't want to help, but it's a major corporation, and how come they're only doing this with the city and not on their own? They have plenty of money to go and do this. Old Oak. There's so many Farhi. There's so many established, really, really established housing developers in this city alone who could eradicate homelessness, houselessness, just like that, that I believe just like that. I'm not looking at people's financial books, but I think I'm hesitant to see the ultimate good from these corporations because they're partnering. I've partnered with nobody. Black Lives Matter partners with nobody, and yet we still do the work. We still do the work, and it costs us. It costs us personally in our personal lives and everything. We still do the work. So I don't know. There's no heroism for me in that partnership. It's a good thing. Keep building the building. Let's put lots of houseless people in there. And somebody else, I can't scroll it back because I was looking at the things, but somebody said, universal basic income. Yes, and I feel like that passed recently, but in order for UBI to pass, they took away benefits from disabled communities. What? All of the things that are in place now need to stay, and then we need to add homes for homeless people. We need to add universal basic income. Once those things are established and have had an opportunity to work, we need to couple it with education and teach people how to manage budgets, teach people how to offer free services for addictions. We need to decriminalize drugs. You know, stop punishing people for their circumstances. Once we get out of that, then we'll find that, 5 years from now, Joe homeless has a job, has still maybe living in his homeless opportunity, but is working towards a better life for him and his family. And you know, I don't know, I can go on forever, but I do have to go. Oh, there's so many questions.
Yes,
you know what, folks?
Thank you so much, Alexandra. You know, there's a big discussion we do need to still have to be able to effectively get action on these topics. But I want to thank you, as well as Tina in absentia, Tina especially for not only giving us some statistics, which I'm sure I and other people have not known, but to show us the cooperative principles and which I think are in harmony with the indigenous principles that they live by. And also, Alex, for you bringing up, the thought of the linkage between, to be able to get action, we need to elect or put in place places of power, actionable people who are just not there, as you quite rightly put it, just to be performative, but to really make the changes. And most importantly, that changes for the least of us will benefit all of us. Okay, so thank you both Tina and Alex. I do have to move on. It's 2:00 and safe travels to you.
Thank you. I just want to say, if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Alexandra Kane, or you can email me info@blmlondon.ca. Thanks for having me, folks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Our pleasure. So now I'm going to move on to, we've had two speakers now who reside in the City of London, but our next speaker is from outside of London. Her name is Terrilee Kelford. She's been working in the field of child welfare for over 24 years as the owner of Kelford Youth Services, which is a private foster care agency. And it's through this work she has become a passionate advocate for youth experiencing homelessness in rural communities. She's the chair of Cornerstone Landing Youth Services, which is a nonprofit charitable organization to prevent, reduce, and end youth homelessness in Lanark County. And she's also the co-chair of the newly established National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness. Terrilee has a master's in counseling psychology, and she's also a registered psychotherapist in private practice. Welcome, Terrilee. You have the floor, 15 minutes.
Thanks, Dirka. Honored to be on this panel with such fabulous speakers. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot more on this experience than I am going to share, but I'll do my best here. So I am a co-chair, and I'm going to try to share my screen here as well, if I'm able to do that. I may have to be given that permission again, am I? I don't see the share screen button. So any idea, Jeff? I'll try to keep talking while we figure this out, though.
You are co-host, Terrilee. It should say sharing.
There we go. I found it. My apologies. Every time you practice this, you think it's going to go better than it does. So, all right. Can people see my presentation? Can somebody just give me a yes so I know it's up there?
Yes, it looks great.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. So again, Terrilee Kelford, presenting today just from Cornerstone Landing. So we are located in Lanark County, and it's a rural area in between Ottawa and Kingston. And I think it's also important for me to note that we're on the unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory here. We're a small community of a collection of towns and hamlets, villages, 68,000 population total, but none of our communities are larger than about 9,000. So, and we're a small nonprofit that started about 10 or 11 years ago to address a gap in services here for our community around homelessness. The only response we had probably 20 years ago when I started a community coalition here was to put people on buses and ship them to the nearest city to access a shelter. And there was no connection with them to get them back to our community if that's where they want to come. So we pulled some folks together and thought that we wanted to try to do something to address this massive gap, because we understood the consequences of dumping. I hate to use that word, but it's pretty much what it felt like. You know, young people at that time into cities and with no connection for them back to their community. So eventually that evolved into Cornerstone Landing. So we support about 75 to 80 young people a year across Lanark County. We do have people sleeping rough here. The housing crisis has also affected us here in Lanark County. There's a great deal of gentrification that's happening from cities out to rural communities here. So we're seeing it getting worse and worse and worse. And that's why I'm presenting today, because we started looking at housing options a few years ago and decided to explore tiny homes as an option. So to fast forward a little bit, actually to take me back a little bit, but we kind of had a bit of a multi-tiered plan to try to address housing. A lot of our young people really wanted, you know, 1-bedrooms or bachelor apartments. That's really what they were sort of looking for. We find, I don't know why my screen is doing that. I think it's on an automatic move forward. So I apologize. I may have to move it back and forth a few times. We wanted to look at building tiny homes. And part of that was because we were working with Algonquin College in our area. We are fortunate to have an Algonquin College campus in Perth. And we were looking at having students build a tiny home once a year for us that we would sort of put together on one property to create a tiny home sort of community. So unfortunately, what happened just before we decided to launch the program was that Algonquin College had to downsize in Perth, and they actually closed their technical trades program. So they didn't have the capacity to be able to commit to building a tiny home once a year for us, but they did actually partner with us on one project. So we did partner with them to build one tiny home as a bit of a prototype. One of the things that we recognized quickly when I started looking at tiny homes was that tiny homes, first of all, mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So they can be like the homes that Khalil's making in Toronto or in Kitchener, where you're seeing the Better Tent City. And then there's also tiny homes being built permanently with water, hydro, and services attached to them as well that are, you know, under 200 or 300 square feet as well. So it's a variety of terms. We started looking when we did the work into building tiny homes that could be used as secondary units. So we overlapped sort of a building code piece with a planning piece. And so we had a bit of a 3-stage process to doing that. So we wanted to build a tiny home prototype to make sure that we could actually build it to code so it could be used for long-term permanent housing. And we also then started going to municipalities to ask them to amend their official plans and zoning bylaws to accommodate tiny homes or secondary units. We wanted to then build several tiny homes on wheels, which is the challenge I'll talk a little bit about, and use them as a bit of a host homes program so that we would be placing them on other people's land to use them for affordable housing for young people. And then we also wanted to look at building a tiny home community. So the first phase was obviously I went around before townships and started asking them to change their bylaws. I started doing that in 2018. It's been slow work and slow progress. I think Perth and Tay Valley Township are the only two that have actually updated their bylaws subsequently. So, and for those of you who aren't aware, the Provincial Planning Act changed to encourage all municipalities. Actually, it's in the Provincial Planning Act that all municipalities should be permitting 2 secondary units per property. So one should be able to be an attached secondary unit and one a detached secondary unit. And so for us in Lanark County, we're still missing any sort of comprehensive emergency housing plan. And so even though we're providing a youth homelessness housing first-based program for young people, we still really lack that emergency housing. And with the housing prices increasing dramatically, it's actually affecting even more of our options now. So the county, you know, thanks to COVID funding they received, were able to offer extended stays in hotels over the last year, but that's not typically the norm. Most people in Lanark County get 3 or 4 days in a hotel if they're homeless, and then they're back out to fend for themselves, which often in Lanark County will mean people are sleeping outside in every town. So we wanted to look at creating some sort of housing model that would address this gap in emergency housing. And so phase 3 then was to look at permanent long-term options, and that's where the sort of the secondary suites came in. But also we looked at asking townships too to remove minimum square footage requirements for new homes. So I don't want to get my statistics wrong here actually, but if you look at the information around size of homes in Canada, the average house size has increased dramatically over the last 15 to 20 years, something from like, 1,400 square feet to 2,400 square feet. So that's the average house size. So, and lots of people living in those now are, couples or single family, single child homes. So pretty large homes for the fact that we have a housing shortage right now. So, and so we also wanted to look at being able to have several houses on one property as well, which seemed to be a limitation too prior to the secondary suite legislation. So the good news is that just recently in the town of Perth, which is just about 20 minutes from where I am right now, has a population of about 6,000 people. They have actually permitted secondary units now. They've amended their bylaws. So you're allowed to have an attached and a detached secondary unit. And then they've also taken an extra step, which is pretty cool. Other communities have done this as well, is they're actually offering $5,000 grants per unit to encourage affordable housing. So you have to meet certain criteria to be affordable, but they're actually trying to encourage people to build secondary units. So and so we have also then just in December bought our first house for youth housing, and we're going to have 3 transitional beds in the main house, but then we're going to be creating a interior secondary unit, which will be a 1-bedroom attached unit. And then we're going to use our tiny home that we built as a bachelor unit as well. So we did partner with Algonquin College in August of 2018. We thought it would take us 3 or 4 months to build a tiny house. It took us about 9 months, primarily because of the amount of research we had to put in it to figure out how to use this tiny home legally. And I'll talk about some of that as well. But so Jürgen Beck, we actually hired a licensed carpenter. It wasn't actually Algonquin College in the end who was able to build our tiny house, but we hired Redwood Homes to do that. Gordon Graff was the architect, and he comes from Perth. He's a local architect who helped us out with the design. These are just initial meetings. I'm going to go fast through some of these slides because you won't necessarily, they may not be as fascinating to you as they are to me. So this is the design. This is the tiny home that we actually built. Quite shocked actually how it turned out pretty closely to this design, thanks to Gordon. Some interior designs and pictures. So you'll see it's very open concept. It's all essentially one living space with a bedroom. So we have a pull-out bed and couch sort of in the shared living or bedroom area. So one of the most important things for us to answer really quickly was, what is the minimum square footage requirement of a home that meets Ontario Building Code standards? And what we found out is that it's actually 145.31 square feet plus a bathroom and laundry. You don't have to have laundry in the unit necessarily, but it has to be accessible and on the property, sorry. So that was actually really surprising to us at first, because when we started calling chief building officials and communities, they were telling us that the minimum square footage was very similar to whatever bylaw they had passed around minimum square footage for single family homes. And so that wasn't actually accurate. That was a difference between the building code and the planning that was happening in the community. So because we built on a trailer, we also had to follow Ministry of Transportation rules too around permitted width of homes. So 8.5 feet is the maximum width you can transport a home without a wide load permit. So we wanted to keep it as simple as possible for us. So we actually built a home that is 8.5 by 24 feet long. So 206 square feet on the exterior. It's about 196 or 197 square feet inside. We didn't end up putting a full stove in the end, because our intention was to use this for short-term housing. But we do have a washer and dryer combination unit in there, microwave and full fridge, and stovetop as well. So this is it. It started with the trailer. That's the warehouse in Algonquin College that they allowed us to use to build the tiny home inside over the winter. And this is the folks building it. So I won't go slow through some of these slides. I'll just try to move us through if I can. So we had plumbing, wiring going in. We were really fortunate to have a volunteer for our project. So Jason Tucker, who we'll see in the middle of that picture with the 3 gentlemen, he was actually volunteered to the project, but he's actually a senior researcher with the Kane Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It was not a CMHC project, so I have to be very careful about how I talk about Jason, but we were really lucky to have him on this, because he's the one who taught us all about this wrapping effect that you'll see in these pictures. So around the windows, you'll see multiple layers of wrapping. And so part of that is to avoid moisture, which is a common problem in smaller homes. So you'll see multiple layers of the moisture barrier being used. And we're putting the windows in. So we did blown insulation in the house. There's our considerations that the architect looked into in terms of what happens when you move a house. So essentially when you drive a tiny home on the road, it's the equivalent of a house going through an earthquake because everything is bouncing and jiggling and moving around. So you really have to be cautious. So we went with blown insulation because we felt it would be best. So you'll see the technical terms in here too, which I'm not equipped to really go into detail about, but. So Jason did a blow test for us in terms of airtight on the property as well. So we were above the requirement. So he analyzed the numbers for us around that. We did a steel roof, and then that's the finished interior. So we have in the living room, we have like I said, a couch that pulls out into a double bed and then folds back in and has drawers in it. We built a fold down table. So there's a wood table you'll see up against the wall there that actually folds down and seats 3. And then we have the kitchen, the laundry's in that closet. And again, we used a washer dryer combination unit so that we could use the space above it for a closet. And I don't think I included any pictures of the bathroom, but everybody walks into our bathroom and says, oh my God, this bathroom is so large, because it is actually a full bathroom with shower and toilet and sink. So it turned out pretty close to the designs that Gordon had. And these are some numbers. So it cost us about, I should be clear on this, by the way, we get a discount as a charity for some of our HST. So it doesn't include the portion of the HST that we get discounted. So it's a bit deceptive, sorry about that. But it was around $86,000 for us to build. And so it just kind of gives you an idea around costs on this sort of tiny home. So, and I worked out a mortgage around basic payments on a mortgage on this type of house. So additional cost to consider though, that when you build anything on wheels, you actually have to get theft insurance. So you'll notice at the bottom our insurance is extremely high. Once we use this on the ground as a secondary unit and tie it to a foundation, that will go back to just regular house insurance costs. So that will be reduced dramatically. And then this is just a big shout out to Algonquin College, who took this project on with us, because it certainly went on a lot longer than they anticipated as well. And the people involved in the donations. So this is the house we bought, just to bring you up to speed a little bit about what we're dealing with right now, because this dilemma around tiny homes and legality is not over for us. This is actually the house that we bought in Perth. And so in the top picture, that's just the basic front of the house. Oops, sorry. And then the bottom picture is actually, sorry, it's kind of blurry actually there. You will see that there's a big addition, and then there's sort of a breezeway, and then there's a shed at the back of that on the left-hand side of the car. And so the portion that's closest to the house is going to be turned into a 1-bedroom apartment. It'll be separate from the main house. That'll be the attached secondary unit. And then we're going to be tearing down the sheds from the breezeway over, and then the tiny home will be parked at the back and attached to services. It has to be attached to services in the town. And it'll be used as a bachelor or short-term unit for housing. So. And just quickly, I'll show you, this is a proposal that was done for us too by Nathan Kishel. He's quite interested in tiny homes and tiny home villages. And so he had actually proposed this for the tiny home village that we were looking at. This is a low carbon build and design that he had come up with, but this is designed for a standard lot in a town like Perth that has about 60 by 100 for a lot size. So you could put about 5 of these units on in more of a community style design. So, and these are a little bit bigger than the one we built actually, which gives you a little bit more flexibility and space when it comes to creating a separate detached bedroom, which is pretty nice. And that would be the aerial view sort of the design. So this again would sort of be a standard lot. Oh, sorry, 60 by 160, which is a little bit bigger than a standard lot for Perth, but it'd be about 120 by 60. So and that was the size of his design for us. And this is, I'm not sure if anybody knew this or not, but Wartime Housing Limited, the government did a couple of times around the war build tiny homes or wartime housing, which approximately 1 million of them still exist across the country. And they were smaller than, most of them were smaller than 500 or 600 square feet. And about 1 million of them still exist across the country today. And they've been housing generations of people across Canada for years. So tiny homes are not really a new concept. We've just gotten away from it with this bigger is better mantra when it comes to housing. So. Board members, and then this is just a quote from one of our young people that we work with in Leonard County, who I thought was a pretty heartbreaking but really smart statement to make around homelessness and what it's like in rural communities. So I would say too, as you're, sorry, it's going to be on a rotation, I think. I would also just mention to you that we have just started the process in our town of Perth of we want to get the permits submitted for the building permit submitted to put the secondary unit on the property. So we're just waiting for our architect to do our interior design. But when it comes to the tiny home, we're actually being told by the local chief building official right now that they will not allow us to use the tiny home as a secondary unit unless we get a building code commission ruling. Not good news for us, but so we're going to have to take that step as well. One of the biggest challenges I've heard about from tiny homes, because once the news broke around our tiny home being built, there's a lot of press and coverage around it at first. We discovered that most tiny homes are actually, if you hear about tiny homes, are not actually being used legally. There's been some exception to the rule when it comes to building code or planning issues. And so that's why we were determined to build our tiny home to Ontario building code standards and address the planning issues in advance. But one of the challenges with tiny homes is that often people build them themselves or build them in one location and want to move them to the next location. And there's a challenge in doing that in the sense that they're typically not inspected then by a local building inspector. So normally if you build a house, you apply for a building permit, the inspector comes out and inspects it at various stages of that process and then eventually gives you an occupancy permit. When we were building in the warehouse at Algonquin College, we couldn't get a building inspector to come and inspect it there, especially when we didn't know where it was going to end up. And so even though our tiny home is actually built above the minimum Ontario building code standard requirements, because it wasn't inspected throughout that process, we're now stuck going to have to fight it out to figure out how to use it permanently now, because the inspectors are saying you didn't have it inspected, so therefore I can't approve it. So we did extensive documentation. Algonquin College actually was planning on using the information from this process to build a curriculum around building tiny homes and affordable housing. And so we have, lots of pictures, as you saw, in videos and documentation from the college around the standards that we use to build it. So we're hoping that's going to help us, but we are going to have to fight it out. So I do follow these conversations around tiny homes quite closely, because I'm really interested in what work has been done around the planning pieces and also the building code issues and how those two things sort of collide to prevent tiny homes from happening. The one thing I would say last, I guess, is that I think it's important to note that tiny homes are not going to solve homelessness. And I think the tiny homes that we're seeing, like in Kitchener and those places, are sort of a response to that. In the meantime, what do we do when there's no permanent long-term housing? And I think anybody who's an advocate around housing and homelessness doesn't want to see it end there. We don't want to see people end up in emergency housing for forever, whether it's a tiny home or shelter. We want long-term permanent solutions. But we also know that there's people dying on our streets. And so we have to find, and even in rural communities, there's people dying outside, like in Leonard County, so of homelessness. So we need temporary solutions. But I also think there's a middle ground in the tiny home conversation around secondary units, for example. I think that's a gentle densification option that is available. And I've seen a lot of families talk about wanting to build secondary units for their young people, for example. If a young person, I have a neighbor who's building one for their child who has autism. So and so it provides them with independence, and yet the parents are still available to support. And I think a lot of seniors also reached out to us talking about tiny homes as well, seeing it as sort of an age in place option. So if their main house becomes too large, too expensive to maintain, they could have a secondary unit in which they get to stay on their property, in their community, surrounded by the things they know and need, and be able to rent out the main house for income. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in tiny homes. I don't think it's going to solve the problem. I don't think we want to be in a place where we're forcing people into small housing as a solution, but I think it should be a choice and an option that we've actually, in a very strange way, taken off the table for people. This bigger is better mantra, like I mentioned, is kind of taken over to the point where we've actually started to rule out through legislation smaller options for housing. So my position on tiny homes is simply that it needs to be an option. We need all options on the table. We need flexibility, and if people are asking for it, then let's allow it. So it is something that can be done very quickly as well, now that the Provincial Planning Act in Ontario is supporting secondary units. So that's it. If anybody has questions, let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, Terrilee, for giving us an idea of what people who live in rural cities and towns across Ontario have to face with respect to homelessness, as well as the things you have to do. It's not just build a tiny home, but you also have to advocate for changes in policy and bylaws as well. And I'm glad to hear that academia, Algonquin College, as well as a researcher from CMHEC is involved in this. So to that, and Scott Dinich has a question. regarding a national unified approach. He understands that CMHC is perhaps a leader, and he believes that this is in conjunction with the newer National Housing Council. Are the various groups working with this council to establish a unified plan? And without yet having much knowledge, he personally expects that there would be an entry-level housing project to get people off the street and safe where they can be supported. But there's a stigma, he believes, that exists with affordable housing projects. So additional steps to move people into regular housing with support and employment opportunities would be required.
Yeah, so interesting, great question. And if I wear my National Alliance and Rural Around Homelessness hat as a co-chair of that organization, I would say there is a great deal of advocacy happening right now as a result of COVID. Some of you may be aware of the $1 billion rapid housing initiative that was announced, and that there hopefully is going to be a second round that was just approved in the budget for $1.5 billion. And so I think there is a bit of a push right now. It's not adequate. It's not enough to actually solve the problem. But there is advocacy happening, I think, on a national and federal level right now to address the affordable housing gap. And that $1 billion initially was primarily given to urban centers, and 40% of it, which was great, not enough, but great, was given to Indigenous organizations as well for Indigenous housing. And so, you know, again, unfortunately, it shows sort of the amount of money that's going to be required to actually solve this problem, because we've allowed it to become, we've gotten so far behind the housing game that it's really hard to catch up now. But so the fact that $1 billion only created about 44,700 units of housing across the country, and we need, you know, 20 times more than that. All that to say, I do think there is some advocacy happening. I think I would follow, if I were you, if you're interested, follow the National Housing Council, because I think they will be making announcements. They're pretty new, so I know they're going to be working hard to push, because they're also a right to housing focused. So I think they will be, you know, trying to work with all the other national organizations around advocacy. So, so now's a really good time to be pushing, advocating, talking to your local MPs, provincial and federal. And doing as much advocacy as you are right now. I mean, this panel is a perfect example of how that can happen. So.
Okay, well, Terrilee, we have a lot of comments in the Q&A about how this is a very practical initiative to get people housed quickly, and people, one person, Jill, says she lives in a war home on a street of war homes, and it's very comfortable. That's great to hear. Brian Smith asked if you were aware that Oxford County has a project involving 8 tiny homes on a property that they own in Woodstock, and therefore with planning approvals already in place, parts of it on a property with other supporting housing. And I'm going to use this as the last question, because we're almost at 2:30 and we have 2 other speakers as well. And Patty Miller says, that's terrible to hear that the trades program has been closed in Algonquin College in Perth. She knows so many families who have benefited from the skills learned over the years. So I'm going to add a twist to Patty's comment, saying that knowing that we currently are in a skill shortage for building trades, how does that affect your work?
Well, you know, one of the most significant issues too, because we had to do extensive renovations on the house that we bought as well, and we're going to have to find funding to renovate the apartment, because we've done all of this work so far on volunteered labor and also on donations from the community. So people donate trades, but the trades are actually, the trades that do exist right now are extremely busy. And I just had this conversation with our architect who's going to work on our plans. The cost of building right now is atrocious. It's about $95 for 1 sheet of plywood. So the cost of and supply of contractor supplies is horrible right now. So it's actually increasing the cost of building. So even for us trying to be a small nonprofit who's based on volunteers and donations, it's a really horrible time to build. And yet we're faced with the idea that if we don't, we can't afford the rental prices for young people anymore as well. So we provide about $35,000 to $40,000 in rent supplements last year to young people to help them get housed. And we just can't keep up with that anymore, because it's all volunteer, like I said, and donations. So so it's a bit of it's a conundrum right now. We have to build, and yet the costs are really high, and trades are busy. It's really hard to even find someone who can come and do the work right now on smaller projects, especially like ours. So it is a serious consideration right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Terrilee. I hope you can stick around for our wrap up. Folks, what we're going to do now with the assistance of David in the background is play a little bit of music from Stringbone. He is originally from London, and one of the interesting things I found out about him is that I'm gonna see if I could move my mouse and get his comment up, is that he got tired of living in this area and decided to do some travels. You know, he was, at the time he was living in London, we had been surrounded by tobacco and corn farms and some of the richest fields of the world. And at the age of 17, he got into hitchhiking and traveled across the West, which is a great way to say Canada, I guess. And he went back and forth between the West Coast and London for 4 years, and now he is traveling worldwide. His music is a mix of folk, blues, country, rock, and other contemporary and traditional elements. And I hope now with me chatting, David, you have enough time to cue it up?
It's ready to go.
Okay. All right. So we're going to take a break, folks, and listen to some music. If you need to get something to eat or use the washroom, please feel free.
Can you hear it?
Yes, I can hear it.
Where do you go when the cold wind blows? Where do you go when the cold wind blows? Where does a preacher go when something's wrong? Where does a preacher go when something's wrong? Where do you go when you're going upriver against the stream? Well, I don't know. Where do you go when nobody wants you? Where do you go, baby? I don't know. Politics of life ain't for everyone. These politics get in the way. You learn your lesson, get back on your feet again. Sometimes these lessons never go away. Where do you go when you're going upriver against the stream? Well, I don't know. Where do you go when nobody loves you? Where do you go, baby? I don't know. Revolution coming down the river, seeing red, but it's not in vain. Revolution making your life easier, standing up to a world that's insane. Ah, we gotta make that change. Ah, we gotta rearrange. Where do you go when you're going upriver against the stream? Well, I don't know. Where do you go when nobody loves you? Where do you go, baby? I don't know. Where do you go when nobody loves you? Where do you go, baby? Come on home. Where do you go, baby? Come on home. Where do you go, baby? Come on home. Where do you go, baby? Come on home.
Back over to you, Dirka.
Thank you. I just want to read a quick statement from the London Homeless Coalition provided to us by their chair, Jaclyn Seeler. Thank you to the London Regional Forum for hosting this very dark but needed conversation on the deprivation of housing in Canada. And thank you to Jeff for inviting the London Homeless Coalition to speak. I apologize, I had to send my regrets. I would have loved to join the other panelists today and to learn from them as well. We were in a housing crisis long before the pandemic began. Remaining focused on housing solutions across the spectrum, meeting people where they're at and asking them what they need and bring ready to provide it are parts of this complex work. A few housing options should include, but are not limited to, some of the following. Financial benefits, such as continued and increased investments in the Canadian and Ontario housing benefits, and municipal housing allowance, which have made a significant difference in housing individuals and families in London and helps to offset the high cost of rent. Continued and increased investments in rapid rehousing programs, which not only provide financial supports, but supports individuals and families with removing the barriers to gaining access to housing, like not having a positive rental history or credit check. Less than 5% of housing stock is government owned. We have the lowest social housing stock in the world. We need continued and increased investment in social housing, as well as the ability to adapt legislative practices that do not create barriers, but that can continue to meet the needs of the community. Continued and increased investments in supportive housing, which can include housing first programs that work on housing of choice within home and wraparound supports. London currently operates 6 under London's homelessness prevention system. Transitional housing and affordable housing units with on-site supports depending on people's needs with supportive housing. Housing is merely the foundation and requires the work of collaborative partners to come together to work alongside individuals on their goals and maintain long-term housing stability. Housing options also need to target specific populations. Pathways to homelessness vary person to person, but themes tell us that within specific populations their needs are, of course, different. We often address women's homelessness, homelessness of young people and people who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color with experiences of homelessness or as two-spirited LGBT queer plus as separate to the overall picture when it is actually not. All of their experiences and pathways that led to homelessness tell us the story of inequity and housing disparity that exists within Canada. And if we do not address all these pathways, we will never solve or end homelessness for everyone. It's important to address the individual themes, but as intersectional challenges to a broken system that is infringing on people's human and housing rights. Other programs that support a housing journey include shelter options for temporary stays, resting places, and at such times motel options as well. These have a place in the housing spectrum and can support individuals and families in crisis or those sleeping outdoors. All of the programs mentioned above are being offered in London through heartfelt work of very caring individuals, peer supports, services across the sector, and our City of London team. However, when we look at housing solutions, we know this is the tip of the iceberg. We have created housing deprivation in Canada through the colonization and the process of intersectional oppressive practices. The data doesn't lie. The most impacted by housing deprivation and poverty in Canada are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Access to adequate housing is not a privilege, it is a human right and recognized as such by the international law. But until we end the commodification of housing and hoarding of wealth, we have to continue to create solutions that only bridge the gap. In partnership with the City of London, our community has been doing a lot of great work and incredibly hard work to try and solve this crisis. continue to stay informed with the great work London is doing, but also know that there are gaps that exist so that at voting time, we can ask the important questions and have the tough conversation with those who want to lead us. Voting for the right issues matter. We have an invested community and an invested City of London. What we need is the province and federal government to do their part, and as well to put housing as a human right first and foremost in all of their decision making. That being said, it's not solely on our governments to to make change. We all have a part to play, in particular those who have benefited from a colonized system. We have learned through this pandemic, when some human lives are at risk, change happens very quickly. We desperately need that same momentum when it comes to people experiencing housing deprivation and living in poverty. We created homelessness and poverty through inequality, policies, and funding gaps. We can reverse it and choose to invest in the solutions. If you want to learn more about the work of London's Homeless Coalition and be a part of a solution, please feel free to visit our website at londonhomeless.ca. I will drop it on the chat, and attend a monthly meeting that is open to all. Meetings take place the first Monday of the month at 10 a.m. via Zoom. The agenda and link can be found on our website. Thank you, Jaclyn Seeler, Chair of the London Homeless Coalition. And I thank the London Homeless Coalition for their attention to our social forum event, Housing for All, and for sending across a statement. What I'm going to do now is ask the audience's indulgence. We have a little over 15 minutes left in our scheduled program, but I'd like to go to 3:30 if people are available, because I think there are important voices and we still haven't done our call to action. So what I'm going to do is we're going to hear from Wendy Goldsmith and Jay Wareham back to back, and then I will do a call to action wrap up and have Anthony Vorkamos also do some advocacy for London Acorn. So first up is Wendy Goldsmith. Wendy is a proud mom of 3 amazing young adults who have been, and she has been working on the front lines of social work in London for over 30 years. She's an active organizer locally, nationally, and internationally, and a founding member of Canada's Boat to Gaza. In all of Wendy's work, she seeks to empower and give voice to women and their experiences, to demand equality and an end to the patriarchy. Wendy works with and for women who have experienced male violence in an intimate partner relationship, and advocates for a just society in which all women and girls can thrive. Wendy values all living creatures, but especially magical elephants, community, porches, and wild dancing in the streets. So welcome, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Dirka. And it really is an honor to be here with all of you. And I really want to thank those who spoke before me. Tina, one of my mentors on this journey. Alex, I have so much to learn from you and to talk with you about. And Terrilee, for doing what you're doing for children who are looking for houses in rural Canada, rural Ontario. I remember the days when I worked for Children's Aid, when we bagged up kids' stuff in garbage bags and waited at the curb with them for the next person to pick them up and move them along in the system. And that's part of the truth and reconciliation that I continue to live with and work with as I work with women in our community. I would like to situate myself in terms of the work that I do. I am a white woman. I come from a privileged background. I grew up in suburban London. I'm on Team Hot Wheels and had all of the trappings of a suburban life that were sold to us along with our Fruit Loops. And it wasn't until I became old enough to ask questions and turn over some new stones in my own life that I started to realize that life wasn't the same for everybody who lived in London, Ontario. And I have continued to live here. I have traveled, but I have also raised my children here, my 3 beautiful children. And so now my work is to try to find ways to make sense of the truth of what is under the stones in London, Ontario, when you get past the Labatt Brewery and the ivory towers and the hospitals and the, you know, the frankly, the old men's club that has run this city for so long. And I do work with an agency now that supports women, and we do that in all the ways that we can to meet them where they're at in their situation. And what I can tell you when we talk about homelessness and women is that homelessness is not as black and white as having a home or not having a home. Homelessness is on a continuum, and homelessness for women means something very different than what it means for men. And that's what I want to raise awareness of, because homelessness for a woman can mean the extreme of not having anywhere to live and being out on the street and living in the corner of a variety store that offers some shelter, or finding an ATM area, you know, off the beaten path, sometimes moving into the suburbs to just have a quiet night away from the traffic and the threats of the street. It can also mean the young girl who just got kicked out of a place where she happened to be living but wasn't on the lease. And now she's couch surfing, and couch surfing for her means that if she wants to stay somewhere and have an actual place to lay her head, then that means she's got to give the guy whose name is on the lease a blowjob before she's able to rest her weary head for the night. So we're talking about a very wide continuum of what it means to be homeless in London, and the impacts, the effects of the trauma that women have experienced as a result of the ongoing inequality in our society, which is evidenced in London on our streets on a daily basis, that women face, and the fact that women do not have an equal place, do not have an equal voice at our political tables, at any table, and continue to be devalued and exploited by those in power, who are usually men. And so when we talk about homelessness, we really need to talk, as Alex said, about the intersectionality of homelessness, gender, poverty, addiction. And the overarching theme is power, which is at the heart of any and all abuse. And so unless and until we begin to address the issues of power and isolation that women feel, where we're not able to come together as women, regardless of our class, of our race, of our color of our skin, of how we identified when we were born versus how we identify now. Those who identify as women, unless and until we are given the spaces to speak our own truth and to speak about the importance of our space and place and our experiences, we will never be able to, within the dominant power structures and systems that exist in the patriarchy, we will never find our voice. We will continue to be at the bottom of somebody's shoe, unless and until we address the inequity that is the patriarchy, unless and until we begin to lift our sisters up in a way that allows each and every one of us, regardless of where we started on this planet, regardless of where we started, we all come from the same seed that brings us into life. And then we expand, or we are forced to compress. And it is the forced compression of the patriarchy, of capitalism, of this machine of consumption that we are fighting against. And what it does is it tries to make us feel like we're fighting it alone. And what I've learned in my 30 years of frontline social work in this city is that we are not alone. The suburbs try to isolate us. The systems with it that we fight within, the child welfare, police state, housing, you know, all of the factors that go against us, that try to dictate the way that we can organize and raise our voices. That is what is stopping us from creating the very world that Alex alluded to, the opportunities that exist right before our eyes if we allow ourselves to step outside the box, to step outside of what society has told us that we must accept as the truth. And in order for us to be able to do that in a meaningful way, we have to be able to reach down behind us and look back and lift our sisters and our brothers up, to lift humanity up with us. So we reach up, we take a hand when we need it, and we pull those along with us when we can. And that concept is not reflected in our current systems. It's not reflected in our political systems. It's not reflected in the way we organize our social services. And that's what I would like to find ways to bring us back to. And I find that when women come together and speak out, then that's when we have those strong voices that can create change and say no in the face of all of the oppression. The Housing Access Center, who does their very best. My hat off to every single human being working on the front lines right now to try to solve these problems, because you are all part of the solution. But when the system tells us that there's this barrier and this barrier and this barrier, and expects women to be able to rise to the occasion over and over again, when we just continue to be beaten with a stick, we're not going to be able to create the solutions that we're completely capable of outside of the dominant paradigm. The best way that I have ever found to express myself is through poetry. And so before I end, I just want to read a poem that I wrote when I thought about what I wanted to say today. And it's called Dear Woman. Dear woman, I hold you in my loving arms as I share the stories, sometimes whispered, sometimes screamed, always searching for place in this world. Dear woman, I see you behind the secrets of your eyes, cast down in shame and guilt that don't belong to you, that never belonged to you. Return to sender. Dear little girl, I hear your infectious laughter, your wild screeches as you unearth another treasure, hidden gems, our ancestors, the trees, decorated and dazzled, tempted you with babbling brooks and pollywogs. Dear little girl, I hear your cries for your mama, when your mama can't help you anymore, when your mama isn't allowed to help you anymore. Young woman, I see you sway, music filled with hope and joy, of wonder and excitement stolen, when he promises it will never happen again. Women, my sisters, I lift you up as those who have lifted me and lifted them before them. I see you, I hear you, I believe you, I am with you. Probably the most important words a woman, a girl could ever hear. And so it goes, the matriarchy, the gathering of the good minds, all my relations, divine feminine rising. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Wendy, and also thank you for the poetry. You know, what it does is it sort of brings into focus things that you know, prose just can't express. So thank you. Next up would be our final speaker, and Jay Wareham. Jay is a 20-year-old activist and student. They do work with both Caremongering London, a mutual aid organization which is active on Facebook, and Equity First, a student and mentor-run organization within First Robotics that aims to address equities within the league and also within STEM as a whole. They are non-binary, disabled, and low income. They want to share their experience as a queer disabled youth being impacted by the housing crisis. Welcome, Jay.
Hello, I think my audio is working, but I can't be sure. David says I'm good. So if you see me looking down, I've got notes here just to make sure I got everything I want to say in. And I apologize in advance if I get emotional, because this is a subject that is very close to my heart. Dirka mostly introduced me, so I'll get right into how this housing crisis affects me. I left home at 17 for reasons that I don't feel comfortable getting into, but to stay housed and in school, I had to go onto Ontario Works, which unfortunately Ontario Works in a lot of ways is a poverty trap. It traps people in poverty and doesn't give them an easy option to escape. It traps them in a loop of housing insecurity. It traps people in a loop of basically having most aspects of their life controlled by the municipal and the Ontario government, which is oppressive within itself in the form that it is right now. After I left home, I was homeless for about a month. I couch surfed to stay off the streets, but I had a lot of instability within that time. And I could have very easily fallen through the cracks. Since then, I have lived in basically very short-term and unstable places. I've lived in 2 transitional housing setups, which were both a year minus a day. And as much as it is helpful, it's better than nothing. It's not being on the streets. The programs aren't long enough. They aren't substantial enough to maintain what we need in the system, especially with people who are struggling with mental health, physical health, people who are marginalized, people of color, Black and Indigenous people who are struggling in different aspects of their life because of socioeconomic oppression. It's just not enough. And in this time, I have basically moved 7 different places, which, if it's been that hard for me, and I have encountered, so many times where I almost fell through the cracks, where I was almost homeless, and how is this going to be, how is this for people who aren't as privileged as me? Because even though I am non-binary, disabled, neurodivergent, I am marginalized in various ways, I am still cis-passing, and I am white. And that means I still carry some privilege. And if it's hard enough for me, it's a lot harder. It's for people who are marginalized in more ways. In addition to all this, being disabled, I have encountered having a lot of trouble finding housing that is accessible. I know many people who have encountered the same kind of thing, finding housing that fits their needs. Having housing, once you get it, is still not enough, because there are so many ways that people end back up on the streets because the housing was substantial and meeting their needs. So from that little introduction, I want to move on to some points that I have laid out. The first thing I want to discuss is the lack of regulations and protections surrounding room rentals. So a lot of people on Ontario Works and ODSP only have the money for room rental because, for reference for people who are not aware, OW is $833, and ODSP, I believe, is about $1,100. It is very, very hard to find an actual unit to rent on that kind of budget. That means a lot of people who are marginalized and who are living in unstable housing don't have protections and regulations for themselves, because there are pretty much no regulations and protections surrounding room rentals, because they in themselves aren't technically legal properties. This puts people, basically anyone in those situations, at risk of homelessness because of the instability and the lack of protections, but especially marginalized people, especially people of color, Black and Indigenous people, disabled people, people who are visibly mentally ill or neurodivergent, anyone who basically sticks out from the cishet, white, able-bodied, neurotypical norm. It puts us all at risk not having these types of protections. There's landlords can easily abuse tenants, not protect them, not protect their rights. They can easily discriminate against applicants for housing, making it harder for marginalized people to access housing. And it innately ties into keeping people in a loop of poverty, because they are moving from unstable house to unstable house, having to come together, put the money together for every move. It is an expensive process to be poor, and this is just trapping marginalized people within a loop of poverty. My next point is wanting to talk about navigating housing as a minority and how systemic oppressions tie into housing, especially in terms of historical oppression and current oppression, gentrification, redlining, etc. So first, I will speak from my experiences as a disabled and LGBTQ person a little bit. So navigating housing for me has been really difficult, because I don't know what environment is going to be a safe environment for me. I don't know if I can show the fact that I am, not physically or mentally, I don't fit the norm, and I do not know if I'm safe around that. For me to get into, housing, as it is, I often have to hide parts of myself. And some people don't get that privilege, visible minorities don't get that privilege still. And, it makes housing so complicated, because so many of us have to hide parts of ourselves that we can, and can't hide certain parts of ourselves. And it plays into long-term oppression. Systemic oppression also very directly plays into this, especially in some of the ways that both Alexandra and Tina highlighted, in terms of how historical oppression has directly impacted people's access to housing through all kinds of different socioeconomic impacts that this oppression has had on people. A major one that you still see a lot of the factors in today is direct discrimination by landlords, and also gentrification, making places more and more expensive to live. It's again disproportionately affecting Black and Indigenous people of color. Moving on from there, I wanted to address how easy it is for people to fall through the cracks, quote unquote. Basically, being someone who's poor usually means you don't get to stay in one place for very long. It means that a lot of times you are basically just having to keep your head above water in whatever way you can, but oftentimes, you are having to move multiple times a year. This is an easy way for people to fall through the cracks, because the instability financially in a move, in trying to save up first and last month, trying to pay for moving supplies, et cetera, is an easy way that a lot of people fall through, especially if they are struggling with physical or mental illness during this time. from that, I wanted to move on to mental health and neurodivergence, as well as physical disability. All three of those factors very inherently affect housing security, especially disorders and conditions that are very much stigmatized. For example, dissociative identity disorder, OCD, that shows very visual compulsions, things that make us look crazy or outside the norm. It's a lot of times, sorry, I'm struggling with words right now. A lot of times that means, we're an easy target for landlords, for roommates to go, you are disrupting where you are being housed, et cetera, et cetera. It's an easy thing for them to go, oh, you're struggling in this way and it's disrupting other people, therefore you have to leave. There is a lot of that happens. There's a lot of, oh, you are too weird for us. And I've seen it happen several times to mentally ill people, where they are just, because people don't know how to act around people who are struggling with mental illness because the lack of education and stigma, a lot of times we lose our housing because of different symptoms of our mental illness. And if not from the symptoms, whether it be struggling to function, whether it being something that is weird to people, et cetera, et cetera. If not through that, through employment insecurity, because mental health, neurodivergence, and physical disability can play into instability in employment. Moving on from there, I wanted to kind of tie back to oppression and navigating homelessness and houselessness as a minority. I haven't discussed yet how shelters and housing supports can be a more complicated thing to deal with as a minority. A lot of times what might be safe for a cishet man, like a shelter that might be safe for a cishet man, or a white man, might not be safe. And usually, oftentimes, there are lots of shelters that are not safe for women, not safe for people of color, not safe for LGBTQ people. I've had direct experience with that. Not safe for disabled people because they're not accessible. And this is not the case for all, but there needs to be higher standards so that all shelters are actually addressing these issues, because there's some that are great. For example, the Unity Project is absolutely amazing. From everyone that I've heard, having gone there, I have heard nothing but good experiences. But there needs to be more regulation, more things in place to hold shelters to a higher standard. Because a lot of times people would rather be on the street sleeping rough than being in a shelter because of bad experience that they have had. Moving on from there, I wanted to move on to living in transitional housing and my experiences with that. I'm currently living in CMHA's transitional housing. I'm in a bachelor apartment, and the rent is capped at the maximum rent for OW, which is fantastic. But the programs are too short to actually stabilize people, and it's another facet in which we have to address and change, to recognize that right now is contributing to the problem of people ending back out on the streets because we don't have more support. Moving on from there, the point that I think I really need to drive, the point that I really, really need to drive home here is having a combination of direct action, direct aid through mutual aid, through, supporting people directly in your community, combined with pushing for increases and increases in amount of support for people on income assistance, but also less restrictions on what those people get to do with their time. Because right now is a poverty trap and is trapping people in housing instability. In addition to that, we need to advocate for disability rent protections, because a lot of times disabled people are charged more for an accessible unit, and that is unfair, especially when socioeconomic oppression in different forms can lead to disability, can lead to health issues. That kind of thing is just another tool of oppression. And finally, I want to talk about how basically all of this ties in together. Yes, we need to address things on a political standpoint. Some things we can get done through the current systems that are in place. For example, like what Terrilee is doing. But I think we need to look at the fact that, yes, we can do things within the system, but there is some direct action that we are going to have to take outside of it. We are going to have to make change. That's basically it for me. I basically just want to highlight that we have to address this in all facets. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Jay, and for your participation. Jay, it mentions a bit of privilege, and I would say not just privilege, I would say extreme fortitude, and also having at enough sufficient times people to support them in maintaining being housed and in particular being in school, right? For their success. There are a lot of people who are particularly youngsters who age out of foster care system, for example, who come into the same kind of situation as Jay, but do not have positive outcomes and cannot participate in society. So thank you very much for that. We are running short on time, and I did ask you for your indulgence for half an hour more, and I see 50 people here still keeping with us, so that's great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a couple questions from the Q&A box. I'm combining questions as we go, and I just want to quickly move into the action call to action section after that. So I have my notes here. The first question comes from Shiam Ibrahim, and it's to Jay to take into action, and she's speaking of homelessness in particular. Do we just fund and go and create small houses remotely, or do we go through procedures to get approval through rules, or else we won't be able to solve our issue? So Jay, I think this is one you can answer, but I think Terrilee should also provide input after that, and I'll give you 1 minute.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dirka. And thank you so much for the question. I think that this is a really good question, because I think it hits the nail on the head in that we have to approach things in all manners that we can. We have to, yes, we can use part of the system. We need to move through it. We need to do things like Terrilee is doing, and use that, do what we can within it, but also recognizing that there are going to be things that we have to do outside of it, because not everyone is going to be able to navigate getting into things through the system when the system is oppressive. So I think it's really important to combine those facets and have mutual aid, direct aid, community care, that kind of thing, and working with organizations in the community that exist, but also having these things that we work through the system, we use legislation, that kind of thing. I think it's really important to combine the two, and that's why I really wanted to answer this question, because I think it hits the nail on the head on we need to address this in every way we can. And that's all I have to say.
Not sure what I can add to that, Jay. That was a brilliant answer. I think, a lot of it's about choice for me. That's what it's about. So not everybody's going to want to live in a tiny home. It's not appropriate for everybody. In fact, lots of people won't want to, but it's about choice. And I think you're right. I think while these systems are sort of thought, there also has to be solutions. And I think that's kind of the push and pull that's happening right now between emergency housing and long-term affordable housing and the advocacy stuff that you see happening on the ground level. I think it's necessary because we need to save lives, but we also don't want to lift our foot off the pedal of long-term housing and that being the goal. But so I think Jay is perfectly accurate in saying we need all levels of advocacy and movement and change, and it kind of all needs to happen at the same time. So I think everybody's voice is important, and everybody's efforts in advocacy right now is needed desperately to really move this forward if we're going to make any significant changes. Yeah.
Thank you, Terrilee and Jay. So the next question is going to be a combination from Lori and Laurie Gibson and Scott Dinich, who had some sort of complementary questions. It was about, I think, Blackstone is an example of a corporation that was featured in the documentary Push the Film, and they are buying up properties and turning them into tax havens rather than providing places to live. In fact, even where people do live in some of these high-rise accommodations, the occupancy rate is quite low, and that is a problem. In fact, even in London, we've got a lot of commercial and office real estate that's empty and could be repurposed for housing, Scott Dinich notes. And you know, what do you have to say about that? So I'm going to start with Wendy.
Thanks.
1 minute, please.
Thanks, Dirka. I think it's a really exciting idea, and I think it also reflects the comments that I've heard from earlier speakers around how we need to take back space and think outside the dominant paradigm and actually show our elected officials how we can organize and reorganize to meet the needs of the most in need in our communities. And at the moment, those are our homeless. So I think that we need to have bold, direct action that takes over spaces that allows people to live in dignity and have their human rights met. So I'm all for those kinds of strategies.
Terrilee, do you want to add something? And then Jay?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say just briefly that, you know, the commodification of housing, I think, is something that we all need to be extremely concerned about. I think we're seeing that, and it's trickling right down to just home ownership in general, right? That property values, people's primary homes now have become an asset, not a home. And so it encourages increased house prices, which is really unfortunate. So we're doing some, with the National Alliance on Rural Homelessness, we're doing some interesting work with other European countries who are working on rural homelessness. And in places like Scotland and Ireland, they actually have room taxes. So if you live in a 3-bedroom house and nobody's occupying 2 of your bedrooms, they actually charge you extra taxes for those vacant rooms. So it's actually not a bad concept. There's lots of ideas out there that can be used to encourage the space that we have to be used adequately instead of these big, huge houses being unoccupied. And so it trickles right down. It's not just the big folks like Blackstock, who are obviously a significant concern around the world, but it's also just the idea that housing as an asset has become a serious problem for all of us.
Thank you, Terrilee. Jay?
I would love to back up both what both of you have said, and I appreciate this question as well. I think it's really a good, example of, we do need to take direct action against these kind of corporations, against this kind of commodification on all levels, and that's basically all I have to add to that.
Okay, Jay, you get the last question from the Q&A. What I do want to let the audience know is we're going to save questions from the chat. We're going to go over them and pass them out to the panelists if you have the time to provide some answers by email, and we'll figure out some way to get it back to the general group. But Jill Bricklin would like to know, what do you think about Wish's effort of trailers as emergency housing this winter? Any suggestions?
So I do appreciate it. I definitely think that is something. I think we need everything that we can get, but we do need a more permanent solution. I'm glad that it is getting people off our streets. I'm glad that it's addressing that. And I was also happy to see, when I was looking at who they were hiring, that was like, when I was looking at their hiring and that kind of things, the things that they were looking for were great. I think it's a good first step, but I think it is a stepping stone. And, Alexandra highlighted this, that it is temporary, and this is not a temporary issue. And I think that if Wish really does want to address this, which I believe they do, I think that they need to look into how they integrate their current solution into being a long-term solution, because this is not a temporary issue. But I think that it's getting people off the streets directly, and I think that they are doing hard work. I just want to see something more permanent as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jay. And for people who do not live in London, Wish is an sort of collaboration between different organizations. I can't remember exactly who was involved, but there's also a link to the London Homeless Coalition as well. And what they did is because of COVID and because of winter, they put some trailers. The trailers were put on a lot, and the people got food. They were able to have a door that they could lock, and things like that. Because during this pandemic in London, people didn't have access. People experiencing homelessness did not have access to bathing facilities. They could not get hot food, so those arrangements were made. So I have a question that came in prior to the start of our webinar from Jen, Sam, and Andrea, and this is what I'm going to use to kick off a call to action. So I'm going to ask each of you to give a call to action, but I'll give the question first. So they do give us congratulations and thanks the Social Forum for offering this webinar today, and they say that a colleague, they're going to attend with a colleague, so I hope you're still here. Their question is, how can a few random people, which is the Social Forum, feasibly and realistically do something to support our local homeless population? A bit of background: they work at a child care center downtown, and every winter they do a warm-up drive at Christmas and leave packages of hats, mitts, gloves, etc. out in their local park. However, they obviously recognize that this is a year-round situation, and they want to do something in the summer as well. So they thought about backpack with essential supplies. They want to know if that's a reasonable idea, or is there something different that could be done that's more impactful that they could try? And for in this question, I'm going to reword it for our general audience. What can we do as individual members of the Social Forum to make homelessness and the housing crisis with rent evictions and extremely high rents that people cannot afford, and substandard housing that goes with those high rents, a thing of the past? This time, let's start with, is Wendy still here? I don't see her on the screen.
She appears to have left the room.
Okay, well, Jay and then Terry.
So first of all, I think that is a wonderful idea. I've directly seen some of my friends out on the streets in the summer and the winter. Being someone who has had housing instability, I'm directly, I have witnessed that directly. And I think that every little bit in terms of supporting homeless people and trying to get them off the streets makes a difference. So no idea is too small. And I think that leads really well into my call to action, which is look at how in your life you can help people. Don't go beyond your means if you are at a point where you can't handle it. But if there is an opportunity for you to help out, look at it and go, how can I do this? And for me, some of those things involve, I want to see a protection put in place for disabled people not being charged more for an accessible unit versus a normal unit. That's one major one that I would call to action, is back something like that. Find something on each level that you can do, something on a level of direct aid, something on a level of helping a community or organization, and something that is on a political level of, trying to push through legislation, because we need to power through in all these aspects. But also take care of yourself and don't burn yourself out in that, because you can't help people until you help yourself.
That's so true. Thank you very much, Jay. Terrilee.
Our nonprofit in Leonard County gets a lot of donations from folks. I was just on Friday picking up a check from a school along with a whole bunch of boxes of donations. So that's extremely helpful. It's extremely helpful when you're trying to help supplement. Jay talked about Ontario Works for young people. It is poverty. I mean, you're making $720 a month to include your housing and your clothes and your supplies and stuff. And so sometimes things like hygiene supplies will actually help sort of supplement income, because you're not having, and cleaning supplies is another one we talk about quite a bit. Like, help if you can help with those sorts of things that people then don't have to pay for. That's great. We always ask for gift cards first, though, because again, I always believe in choice. People like to go out and pick out their own hygiene supplies, and so gift cards are a good idea too. So you can hand out $25 or $50 gift cards to folks, so they can pick up what they need when they need it. And then just advocacy in general. Whatever you're able to do to advocate, change. Not just advocate with politicians, but when you're having a conversation over your dinner table about the people you see on the street, make sure you're changing attitudes and that you're educating people about what that's about and the stigmas around folks who identify as homeless. So and municipal stigma and NIMBY was something that was brought up in some of the questions. So one of the best ways to avoid NIMBY is to make sure that the bylaws are changed so that you have inclusive zoning to begin with, so that people don't have to fight it out. The worst thing that can happen to a housing developer meaning nonprofits, anybody trying to get affordable housing, is to have to apply for what's called site-specific zoning amendments. Even for secondary units, communities are having to do that right now because they don't have the bylaws in place, which they should. Every municipality right now in Ontario should have secondary units permitted in each of their communities right now, today. It was passed actually 2 to 3 years ago in the Provincial Planning Act. So if you can get your municipality to pass those bylaws, it means that each individual who builds a secondary unit doesn't have to fight it out with their neighbors every time. It's just law. They just go do it. But if they don't have those bylaws passed, then people have to fight it out individually for every single secondary unit that's built. And that's just ridiculous. So there's all kinds of mechanisms we have out there, but make your voices heard. There's a ton of politicians I could complain about right now, but they need to know from you, the public, that housing is important to all of us and that we have to get people housed. So.
Thank you very much, Terrilee. Thank you very much, Terrilee. We are 2 minutes. I really thank you, all of you who have stuck with us till the end. This has been a very heavy but informative session. I want to make you aware of 2 groups in London that does advocacy for tenants. One is the London Tenants Association, and the other one is London ACON. We've been trying as a social forum to promote both of those organizations' events. London ACON has been the more active of the 2, and just this Thursday, they had a webinar at night about tenants' rights. I think this is something that they run on a regular basis. I was hoping to have Anthony Verkamos talk about that, but he's not available right now. So I do want to also remind you that at the St. Joseph's Hospitality, there will be a meal coming up for those that need it, or those who know people that need it. It's this Thursday, April the 29th at noon at the Old Age Old East Village Cares, located at 707 Dundas Street at St. Joseph's Hospitality. Hot meals and snacks will be served. On May the 8th, we have the second part of this session. You can email us now to at the London Regional London rsf2020@gmail.com if you want to RSVP. But if you responded to this event, we will follow up with an email to let you know more details about the March 8th event. It will be a similar format, starting as well at 1 to 3 p.m. Again, thank you for all your wonderful questions. We really appreciate them. And most of all, thank you for our panelists, Tina, Wendy, Alexandra, Terrilee, and Jay. We appreciate your perspectives. We really wished all of you could have been available to the end to do wrap up, but perhaps, we know life is busy and perhaps another time. And we hope to see you again. And please, when you go home, talk to your friends and family about whatever little, as Jay says, in your capacity to change things for our neighbors, and most importantly, to change things for the Indigenous people who have invited us in some ways, and we have treated them very disrespectfully in not heeding the agreements and the treaties that were made with them as a colonizer, and so we need to really move on that fact. So again, it's a wonderful day outside, but there are many people who are experiencing all the elements 24/7. And no matter what our station in life is, we must make some effort to help them become housed, because housing is not only a human right, it's a foundation of health. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dirka. Jay mentioned the Unity Project, and I just wanted people to note that they're running a fundraiser all week. It ends today. I'll just throw up the little video. I'll put the link for it's Up With Art, Unity Project with Art, and their video from their coordinator, Chuck Lazenby, is a great message to go out on. So you can find Up With Art at their site. Just a moment. Unity Project with Art is here. And even if you can't afford art, which is true of many of us, you can help spread the word about what they're doing. Important work in our community. Where's the share? Here we go. Oh, not that one either. My apologies.
Hello everyone, I'm Chuck Lazenby, Executive Director of the Unity Project for Relief of Homelessness in London. I greatly miss the opportunity to see you all at a live event, but I'm very grateful that you've joined us for this online version of the 11th annual Up With Art. This is the second time we've done this, and certainly since the last, it's been a very difficult year for everyone. Some of us have struggled and been affected more than others, whether that's through illness or the loss of loved ones, increased anxiety or depression, financial hardships, and certainly the overall debilitating stress of it all. We've all been forced to adapt to new ways of living and connecting with each other. And the last year has been no different for Unity Project. It's been a really tough year for us. And I'd like to share with you a small part of that story. When the pandemic hit just over a year ago, we were just emerging from a pretty miserable winter. Shelters were full and more people than ever were sleeping outside due to the higher rents, the low vacancy of affordable units, and growing poverty. The cost of surviving increased while social assistance rates remained tragically low. As London shuttered its doors, we struggled to keep ours open safely. It was impossible for us to maintain physical distancing in our small, crowded shelter. And in the early days, we didn't even know anything about PPE, let alone have a supply in our stock. We shifted operations to a hotel within just a couple of weeks. There we doubled our occupancy, prioritizing seniors and those with pre-existing health conditions, which make them vulnerable to the worst effects of the virus. We adapted, and we continue to adapt to all new developing information, systems responses, and doing that work in partnership with our community. We continue to help our participants obtain and maintain housing and to move unsheltered folks into the hotel as space becomes available. We are working very hard and under extreme pressure. We have, for most of the year, with cases only escalating over the past couple months, kept the worst of COVID-19 at bay from the population we serve. But in the meanwhile, there's also been an opioid and overdose crisis, which continues to ravage our community, and we've seen too many lives lost as a result. We are dwelling in an uncertain future. We have funding to stay at the hotel until the end of June, and though we hope that continues, while the pandemic remains a threat, we have no guarantees. But we do know one thing for certain. We can never return to our Old East Village facility, at least not in the same form we left it. We were seeking a new building or land on which to build before the pandemic, recognizing that our facility, as much as we loved it and as wonderful as it was in so many ways, was just too cramped to support best practice in our programming. It is a time when London needs our program and services now more than ever. And it's also now the time for us to find a new home. And this is where you come into our story. And why you need to give to Money Now. For this year's Money Now, an anonymous donor has put up a matching gift of $20,000, and your donations will be matched dollar for dollar up to $20,000. And we're going to ask you to stretch for us and make sure we hit a $50,000 goal by Up With Art's close at 9 p.m. on Saturday, April 24th. So please give your money now. Help us reach our goal, to help Unity Project continue to go beyond just beds and meals, to go beyond keeping people alive just another day, and to help prevent and end the experience of homelessness for people in our community. Thank you so much for your support. I hope to see you in person next year, and do remember to please bid generously.
Thanks for airing that, David.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now. We'll share the notes later so everyone can see the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Bye for now.